morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to FreeThought Hour. If you've been watching Global Atheist News, which has just finished, you won't appreciate the trauma I went through today to get it uploaded in time. So I won't bore you with that, but I did. I got it up with 4 minutes to spare. So I hope you've enjoyed watching that, if indeed you have. Now, I've got a very interesting guest. I usually have interesting guests, but this one's particularly interesting because she's gone from none to none. N-U-N to N-O-N-E. I've never heard anybody who's done that before. Here she is, Janice Selbie.
Hi, everyone. How the devil am I? Wow, I feel pretty great.
Good. Because British Columbia isn't that great at the moment, is it?
We're having our share of troubles with extreme weather events, and it's pretty much been going on for several months. Because in the summertime, we had the heat dome, and hundreds of people perished as a result of that, and now just torrential flooding and landslides. It's crazy.
Really extreme. You've never had 50 degrees.
It was very unpleasant.
And that's centigrade, so I don't know what you called it.
Yeah, Celsius. Yeah, it was very hot. I made sure every day that I was putting out bowls of water every few hours for any animals, cats, dogs, whatever that happened to actually be outside.
Yes.
Yeah, it was just a very uncomfortable, hard time, and a lot of folks who didn't have access to air conditioning.
Yes.
They died as a result.
I know. Yes. And now, from one extreme to the other, you had your road washed away?
Several highways, have truly been washed away. I mean, nature has her way. So Canada and British Columbia, we really need to be changing direction and trying to revamp how we do things and looking at our roadways and our infrastructure. And we all knew climate change was coming. We just didn't know it was here.
Well, yes, I think you know now. I think we all know. Yeah. I think we all know now, because it's not good news, is it? Originally, when it was first sort of floated as a forthcoming thing, it was described as global warming, which, to somebody who doesn't live in the tropics, sounded quite nice.
Yes, sounds pretty gentle.
Yes. But in fact, it should have been named global storming.
Yeah.
That would have been more accurate.
I think you're right. Yeah. And that gives it a much greater sense of urgency, and it is urgent. So, and I mean, previously we've just been watching people on the other side of the world and feeling sorry for them that they're going through these extreme events. But boy, it sure is different when it hits in your home.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Well, I'm keeping my fingers crossed because we're pretty lucky. So far, it hasn't really happened here. We've watched it in Germany, for example, where a city got flooded.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we've got a very cold snap in Scotland with high winds, 100-mile-an-hour gusts of north winds, so they're cold, and a couple of guys were killed when trees or walls fell on their cars. So completely escaped. But down on the south coast, it's been pretty lucky. So, hello, Frank. Thanks for watching. Frank's a regular viewer. He's based in Kentucky, and he's saying this should be most interesting to folks on either side of the theism-atheism divide, because you've got an interesting story, haven't you?
I do. I think it's interesting. It's certainly been quite a journey for me. Would you like me to start telling a little bit about it?
I would, and I'm going to full screen you so that I get off and you can tell the audience on your own.
Sure.
Okay? So I'm handing over to Janice Selbie, the nun who's now a nun.
Well, I definitely now would classify myself a nun in the NONE sense. I actually was married and raised children before, so I can't say I was an earnest nun, NUN. But I was raised in a Pentecostal home. And so that means from the time I was quite little, I was used to my parents speaking in tongues, and I can vividly remember them anointing me with oil when I was sick, and praying for me, and lots of Bible study and prayer group and involvement in church. And I'm quite musical, so I loved that aspect of it. But I knew that it wasn't quite normal. We did attend public school, and I saw that this wasn't the way that my friends were being raised for the most part. And I wasn't doing a lot of just the usual kind of teenage things that teenagers do, because I was very, very involved in my youth group. And so things that were important to me were maintaining, my purity, my sexual purity, and I would only listen to Christian music and read Christian books and this sort of thing. And then once I got into my early 20s, like probably around maybe from the age of 19 to 22 or 23, I had a romantic breakup that was really significant. And at that time, then I started wandering away from the faith and started spending a lot of time in bars, and joined some rock bands, sang in a number of rock bands and so forth.
Ooh.
I know, how exciting. But
Yes.
the whole time I did that, I was struggling with the feeling that I was sinning. I never could really enjoy myself because I thought I was being watched and judged, and I knew my parents were very concerned, and so they were thrilled when I had my return to Jesus moment at about age 23.
Mhm.
And then I dove ever deeper into the faith, went really hardcore, as I think this happens to a number of people. And then married a man who was equally religious as I was, although he'd come from a different background. So he didn't embrace religion until he was in his very late teens. He hadn't grown up with it. So he had somewhat of a choice, and his personality and so forth had already formed by the time he embraced religion. And we got married and started having kids, and he wanted to go to Bible college. So off we went to a very conservative Bible college in Alberta, one of the prairie provinces of Canada. And while we were there, I started homeschooling the children. And Christian homeschool groups are extremely conservative. They tend to be. They have a quiverful mentality. I don't know if you're aware of what that is. So that means you have as many children as you possibly can, because the Bible says be fruitful and multiply, and it's a way to grow the kingdom, grow the church of God.
Yes.
Yeah. So we call that.
It's not the only religion that adopts that policy.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. And so we had only had 2 children, and then my husband took measures to make sure that we wouldn't be having any more children. Well, then, of course, when we joined the homeschool group, and I'm so surrounded by these people who were so sure that was the way. I begged and begged him to reverse his surgical situation, and he said, as if that's never going to happen, so just forget it. So I had to just kind of limp along and be satisfied with only having 2 kids. But one thing that, growing up in a very religious home, and I will say also that my father is a narcissist, so he's a fundamentalist and a narcissist, and he was quite volatile.
I didn't know that narcissism was a religion.
Seriously. He was emotionally quite volatile, which meant growing up in that situation, you're never on even footing. You're walking on eggshells. You're always off
Yes.
balance. And narcissists tend to like this dynamic.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I felt very safe with rules and regulations. Those were my safety. And
Yes.
of course, religion is great at those. And
Yes.
so when we moved to this conservative town, attending the conservative Bible college, and then I'm what my ex-husband now, what he would say to me, he would say, "You're drawing your circle ever smaller. How small are you willing to make that circle?" And I thought it was a very righteous thing to do. Of course, I'm making the circle smaller and smaller because no one's holy enough. And eventually I started interacting with women who would come into the town, the prairie town, into the grocery store. I'd see them. So I knew they weren't part of the Bible college or even part of our local community. They always wore head coverings, and they were always dressed very modestly and plainly. And I asked my husband one day, "What is up with those people? I didn't think we had Amish here." And he said, "No, they're not Amish. They're a type of closed Mennonite. And the Bible, the New Testament, actually does endorse dressing the way they dress, like with women wearing head coverings and modesty and so forth." And I thought, oh, I better, if it's in the Bible, I mean, I want to live as close to the Bible as I possibly can. I was very sincere about my faith. And so I was able to use his Bible college library card for the college library and take out all kinds of concordances and lexicons and all sorts of books helping to interpret the Bible, because I really wanted to do a deep dive into this and see if I was missing out on something that I should be doing. So,
Saying that,
yeah.
those books,
Mm.
coming from my point of view, I'm
Mm.
a retired science teacher.
Yes.
And the fact that you've got to have books about a book,
Yeah.
it tells us something. It tells us that there's some imperfection about the original book.
Yes.
That needs heavily, not just interpreting, but restating in a communicable way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an opportunity to edit, to insert opinion and bias.
Oh yes.
And so what you
Yes.
end up with is a propaganda document.
100%. Let's just say you're preaching to the choir. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so true. Which of course I didn't know at the time. I thought I was really the epitome of righteousness and enlightened being, because I was doing this hard work. And then I decided, well, these are the rules, and I'm all about rules. So I don't understand why these other women around me are being disobedient to scripture. And it's not my place to corral them and beat them over the head and make them obedient, but it certainly is my place to lead by example. So I got, put away all my jewelry, even my wedding ring, stopped wearing my wedding ring, got rid of my makeup. Only wore long skirts and dresses, and started making and buying head coverings for myself so that my hair, I stopped cutting my hair and wouldn't allow anyone to cut my daughter's hair. And my hair was always covered. Only my husband would see my hair.
That's so weird, isn't it? What is it about hair that religions are always obsessive about?
Well, the Bible says it's a woman's crowning glory. And I think it's just another way to control women.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because in the Muslim religion, of course, if you're in the fundamentalist end of it, not only must you cover up your hair, because the sight of a few pieces of hair could infuriate a man with an uncontrollable frenzy.
Yes.
But you've got to cover up your entire body and walk about in a sort of tent.
It's so ridiculous. And it really does also contribute to that culture of victim blaming and not holding people accountable for their actions, not holding men accountable
Yes.
for their actions.
Yes.
So I felt that I was being very obedient to Scripture, and I was absolutely doing the right thing. I think it was scary for people who knew me, people on the Bible college, friends that I had, even for my parents. My dad thought it was great. The stricter and more fundamentalist I became, he thought it was great. I didn't know until years later that my mother was concerned for me. Of the two, she is the one that's always been much more liberal and just very much about loving other people and serving other people, whereas my dad is very much the one who's been about rules and regulations only. So people who, pardon me, knew me for a while, they were concerned. I asked my husband's permission. Pardon me. I asked my husband's permission before I made these radical changes because, the whole thing is about submission. It's about learning to submit. The head covering for me was a reminder, a visible reminder of my place as a woman in the church and in my marriage. So the fellow that I had married was quite a quiet fellow, a very gentle fellow, and I am not. I'm generally outgoing and gregarious and opinionated. And so our marriage was difficult for a number of reasons, including that our personalities were quite different. And so I thought the struggles in the marriage had to be 100% my fault. They could never be his fault because God had given him to me to be my spiritual head. And so I needed this constant reminder that I was to shut my pie hole, and just.
Yes, it's such a restriction, isn't it? I find it hard to come to terms with that because you were sort of conditioned into being subservient or a second-class citizen, and therefore you seem to have wanted a control freak man to impose some limits and rules and regulations on you, and you hadn't got it. You'd got a normal guy.
Mm-hmm. You'd be amazed how often that is the case when families end up homeschooling and going ultra conservative, how often it has actually been the wife and the mother who has been the driving force behind that. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that was the case with me, but I did not know how common that was. I came to find out it is fairly common. And my husband was moderately comfortable with it, not 100% comfortable. He'd known me long enough to know that I do tend to go to extremes. I mean, it's very hard for me. I'm searching a lot for that middle road, and I can find it elusive at times. So anyway, this was how my life changed according to the choices that I was making. And then he became a pastor, which I actually hadn't wanted. He was going to become a professor or a teacher at a Bible college at a theological institute, which I thought he'd be great at because he's pretty smart. He's a good teacher, but not a shepherd by any stretch of the imagination. So I knew if he ever went into that field, we'd be in trouble. And eventually he decided that was exactly what he had to do. And I literally begged him on my knees at one point, please, I think this is a terrible decision that you're making, and I think our family's going to pay a heavy price for it. But he was the man, and he was the one that was tasked with making all decisions for the family. So away we went, and it was one of the worst years of our life. For me, it was great. For him, he loved it. He just, because he would lock himself in the office at the little tiny church in the little tiny prairie town and just think about God and work on his sermons and his music for the week. Meanwhile, the parishioners are knocking on the door, banging on the door, trying to get in. They want their shepherd to be shepherding them. And so I'm trying to run interference constantly between the parishioners and the pastor.
Yes.
It was a very hard year. And then he eventually said to me also that he wanted me to stop wearing my head covering because it was just creating a noticeable division for the people in the church. None of the women wore coverings, and then the people in the town just thought it looked ridiculous. And so that hurt me a lot when he asked me to do that. Well, he didn't ask me, he told me to stop wearing it. And because I thought I was wearing it as an act of submission, I just was so confused that he didn't want that. But he didn't marry someone who was normally submissive. He married me because he liked that I was outgoing and made decisions on my own.
Yes.
So it was hard on both of us. And unfortunately, that year, in addition to it just being a real challenging year trying to settle into being a pastor's wife, when I knew we weren't a great fit, there were a number of...
Can I pick up on something there? Because
sure.
I don't know many men who want a wife as a sort of pet.
That's right.
I think most men want a companion, somebody with a brain that they can bounce off and have fun with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not somebody submissive and just doing like a slave the bidding of her master. I don't know many men like that.
Well, you'll find some in the church, not all, but some. As women are primed in the church to become servants, men are primed to be overlords of those servants. And for the most part, my former husband wasn't like that. And these choices that I made when I dug myself ever deeper into fundamentalism were my choices. He wasn't pressuring me. I remember, I think there was one time that came up where I was really exhausted from just a full day of homeschooling the kids and grocery shopping and cleaning the house and preparing the meals. And I had asked him at the end of the meal, would he mind clearing the table? And he said, why should he do that? And I said, well, to set a good example for the children. And he said, if you are so hung up on being a good example, why don't you clear the table and do it with a servant's heart? And that was like a kick in the gut. But it was also, it was eye-opening to me on a number of levels. And that was really far out of he didn't usually behave like that.
But it was a wake-up call to you.
It showed me what I was creating. And so then he went on to become a pastor. We moved to this tiny town. Things were going poorly. And then also that year, my parents split up after about 40 years together. So that was, although I was pleased for my mom, it still was a shock to me at 35 years old, suddenly having, my parents not be together. And then my nephew killed someone back home and was on the run. So that I was contacted and told that he may be coming my way. So I had to be prepared to contact the RCMP. And so that was drama and a lot of stress. And there were other things that were just coming up that year. It felt like I was just being pummeled from all these different directions. And my marriage was further unraveling. We were really having a hard time keeping it together. Eventually, he decided, we're leaving here. We're leaving this church in this prairie town. We're moving back to a bigger city center. And so I was happy about that part, but I knew that it also meant more changes. I would have to, if we weren't living in a tiny town, we couldn't afford for me not to be working. Yes. I would have to start contributing to the family income. It's expensive to live in Canada.
And that meant no homeschooling.
That's right. Yeah. So things were shifting there. And I took some online courses and became a medical transcriptionist or stenographer. So I could do that from home or in a doctor's clinic or in the hospital.
Yes.
And we eventually we moved back to the town where we met, the town I grew up in, and the town we were married, and it's where we live now.
Right.
But all these difficult things kept mounting, and it was so hard. And I'm leaving tons of stuff out, but one really significant thing happened, and that was our youngest daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and that is a life-threatening illness that you do not recover from, and she requires insulin all the time to survive, and an insulin pump. And so that for me was the last straw. That was the final nail in the coffin of my faith, because I thought, if there is a God, how could that God afflict my innocent, sweet child in this way? And I didn't want anything to do with any God that would do that. So I was grappling with that on my own, could not share it with anyone, because my religious friends would say, you just don't have enough faith. God is just testing you. Don't let your faith grow cold. God can work miracles. And my dad, I finally had to shut him down, because he kept saying to our 10-year-old daughter, I'm praying that God will restore your pancreas. And I was like, stop it. Stop saying that. It's not going to happen. And she already was struggling at 10 years old, feeling like maybe she had sinned and maybe God was punishing her. So it was just a huge mess of emotional trauma. It was really, really awful.
Imagine being a 10-year-old girl feeling guilty for her own diabetes. That's horrible.
It really was horrible. And I didn't feel that I could comfort her sufficiently, because I was also going through my own deconversion process and doubting and anger and the grief that goes along with losing faith. And one night, everybody else had gone to bed, and I was in the living room watching this old war movie, this black and white movie. And these prisoners of war, they had managed to escape and run into the jungle. But one after one, they were dying off. Either a sniper got them, or a poisonous snake, or they starved or succumbed to illness or whatever. Finally, there's only one guy left living in the jungle, and he looks up at the full moon, and he's shaking his fist, and he says, I don't even believe in you anymore. And I look out my window, and the full moon is shining down on me, and tears just rolled down my cheek. It was really hard. So that resonated a lot with me, and that speaks to the depth of the pain that people go through.
Yes, indeed.
When they lose their faith.
Well, I feel for you. I'm sorry you had to go through that. But this explains why you do what you do now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it absolutely does explain that, because I didn't know anyone else who had been as devout in their religious faith and belief as I had been, and then had walked away from it. My entire worldview dissolved. I had no structure or framework left to hang anything on.
And you needed boundaries so much.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I really felt like I was adrift. I'm in a gray dinghy on a gray ocean. I can't see any land. I can't hear anyone. There's no familiar landmarks. I just am the waves are just kind of smashing me around. I don't know what's going on. But I still have to go to work every day. I still have these kids that I'm raising. I'm still trying to make my way through a very difficult marriage. And there's no one that understands. If you talk to someone who has never been religious, they say, well, so you stopped believing in Santa Claus. So what? Pull yourself together. But it's not like that at all. It is such a core wound. Like there's so much that's dissolving. Everything is dissolving. And how do you hold yourself together? It felt like I was going crazy.
I guess your kids had not only one of them to come to terms with the diabetes, but also both of them were having to come to terms with going to public school.
Yeah. First, of course, we put them in Christian school, which they hated because the Christian school kids had all been together since preschool. So anyone who comes later in the game is not really welcome.
Yes.
So that both kids,
problem.
It is.
That is a problem with all through schools.
Yeah.
It sounds like a good idea to put your child into a school at 3 and take them out at 18, but it's such a closed community. It's such a narrow existence. I think there's a benefit to putting kids through different schools at different stages so they get a chance to start again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's actually a really good skill to learn, talking about resilience and being able to start again. And so my daughters both asked at different times if we would put them in public school, which terrified me because then I realized these kids, they don't even know what different swear words mean.
Yes.
They were so innocent. And I knew then, I felt really like I was throwing them to the lions. It was very hard. And with my daughter's dependence on the diabetes pump and schools at that time not having a keen enough understanding of diabetes, it was very scary. So, but we did it. We put them into public school, and it was hard on them both. And so then they also had a front row seat to my deconversion, which was quite a gong show, you know. So they saw mom go from being absolutely uptight and fanatical about rules and regulations to, you know, mom's getting tattoos. There's no rules. We can do whatever we want. So yeah, we're going from one extreme to the other. And my husband by that point had completely emotionally checked out, was you can call it addicted if you like, but there was an online role-playing game, multiplayer game, World of Warcraft, and that became his world. That was the only place I think he felt that he had any control or any power. And so so he withdrew emotionally from all of us at that time. It was very, very hard.
So one of your daughters was 10.
Yeah, when she was diagnosed. The other was 12.
So, when they went into public school, they were still at an age where they could adapt.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been harder for them at 15, maybe, when they've got all the hormones raging as well.
Yes. So they didn't go to public school. They didn't enter public school then until probably maybe age 14 and 12 or so it was, the hormones were in play. And then neither their dad nor I was really available for them in the way that I wish we could have been. Even because our own marriage was so difficult and falling apart, but also because we had both lost our faith.
Yes,
and
so he had as well.
He was slower about it than I was, but he wasn't as fully invested. Like I said, he came to it at age 18 or 19. I grew up with it. So all the ways I had to judge anything or interpret anything, they all filtered through that lens of Christianity that I had. It was so much a part of me. And so I went to work at the local hospital. That was the first time that I was having regular interactions with people who were not saved, with the unsaved, with people who were not Christians. And at that point, exactly. That's exactly right. And when I first started at the hospital, I was still quite conservative in the way I looked. Like my hair was very long, not quite to my waist. I was still only wearing long skirts, and no makeup. And so I wasn't wearing a head covering though, but I definitely did not fit in with the rest of the people. And gradually, as I was working every day with these women, I let my guard down a little bit and got to know them. And then one gal moved in. She moved from Edmonton, which is another province. She moved to British Columbia, and she just seemed so smart to me. And she had left her husband and moved to BC. And so I knew she was going through this divorce, and I was already now thinking about divorce. When my parents divorced, that gave me some permission that I never had, because I didn't know anyone. Yeah, I didn't know anyone as good or holy as my mother. And if my mother could divorce my father and still be a good person, then maybe I didn't actually have to stay in a really miserable, hard situation. So I got to know this gal quite closely, closer than anyone else. I felt like I could trust her. And one day she and I are sitting in a coffee shop, and I lean over to her and I say, Heather, I'm starting to wonder whether the Bible is actually literal. Like, was there really Adam and Eve? And she put her hand up to her mouth. She was actually laughing. She said, oh, Jan, I figured that out when I was 7, but I'm glad you're catching up. Yes, keep going, keep asking the questions. You're moving in the right direction. But it was so terrifying for me to think that, because if I was wrong about that, what else was I wrong about? And no one was telling me, or I just couldn't recognize it. How was I to know what's true and what's not?
I meet a lot of people on here who have had that sort of, it's a realization that you've been deceived for decades from childhood. And it's a traumatic thing. It's no wonder so many people who come out of religion have a grievance for having been in it, and then want to become active at repelling it.
Yeah, and letting other people know that it's not all it's not all that you think it is, particularly if you were raised in it. Yes, so I was really exploring these things. Then I started, I gave myself permission. So we lived across the street from a used bookstore. And one day when my husband was off at work and the kids were at school, I gave myself permission to go across the street to that used bookstore. I would take the children in there to get Archie comics and comic books and stuff like that. But there was a room at the back of that store, and it was, the door had a long velvet curtain separating, and above it, it said occult and alternative religions, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go in that. I'm going to go open it and step in that room. And I had to work up my courage to do that. But I wanted to find a book that might shed some light on what was happening to me, or other religions, or anything that I had never been allowed to explore. So I went back there. Lightning did not strike me, although my heart was pounding. And I found a book that seemed kind of like a textbook. It was examining Christianity, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Islam. And so, religion. Pardon me?
Comparative religion.
That's exactly it. That's right. And so I took it up to the counter, and I actually asked the young lady if she would put it in a brown bag for me. I was very nervous about anyone seeing me with this. And we were renting half a duplex. Our pastor owned it and lived on the other side. So I was quite nervous. So she gave me the book in the brown bag, and I ran back to my place, and I hid it the one place I knew even God would not look, which is to say my underwear drawer. And so I hid it in that drawer for quite a while.
Can I just explain to my audience that a duplex, we don't really have them in the UK, but it's sort of one front door, but inside it's divided into two houses. The nearest we have is a semi-detached, but they have independent front doors.
Actually, duplexes do have two front doors. Our neighbor had his own, and we had our own, and so yeah. So we would see each other when we pulled up, to the park.
So that would be a semi-detached in our language.
Oh, all right.
The ones I've met, you have a single front door. You go into a hallway, and then there's two more doors, one into each house.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, it added a little bit of pressure knowing that our pastor, who was the one who introduced us and married us, was right there. And so over time, I started looking at that book that I bought and making more trips back to that bookstore. And then I really started getting into New Age stuff. And, I grew dreadlocks. I started playing the didgeridoo. I started, learned to meditate, started taking these courses on supernatural type stuff. Oh, metaphysical. We would call it the metaphysical stuff.
Yes,
so I became ordained as a metaphysical minister, all this kind of stuff. But I kept it somewhat quiet. Like I wouldn't go around announcing to people, oh, I can, do this or that. But it was obvious that I was changing. My views on life were changing. And my kids, were watching. And I asked my girls at one point, how are you doing with everything that's going on? Like our views have obviously changed. Do you still believe in God, or what do you think about the Bible? And this was probably when they were maybe 13 and 11. And they both said, well, they never had really quite taken it that literally in the first place. And they both thought that I was a lot more fun now, the way that that I was changing. And then eventually my husband and I did separate and divorce. And we've actually been able to build just a very loving and kind friendship. We are pretty much best friends with each other, help each other out any way that we can, have family dinners together. Even as we have different partners, that's fine. They just get grafted in. It's been the best possible result in that way.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad, because divorce can be such an acrimonious thing, and it can be so expensive too once the lawyers get their claws into you.
Yes, it would be if we had anything, but partly because we were so religious, we never had any money. We never owned a home. We really just were trying to store up our treasures in heaven, as the Bible says to do. So we didn't even really have anything to split. And so then I went back to school also, and I became a registered professional counselor. And I started exploring religious trauma. I didn't know anything about religious trauma. Other than I had been traumatized.
It's only recently become a thing, hasn't it?
Well, Dr. Winnell wrote her book about it, about religious trauma syndrome, about 25 years ago. She's a real pioneer in the field, but it's only been the last few years that it's really been gaining traction. So I started interacting with Dr. Winnell. Her book is called Leaving the Fold, by the way. It's a really important book for anyone who has left a fundamentalist group. Leaving the Fold by Dr. Marlene Winnell.
Leaving the Fold?
Yes, because the church is the fold. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's got sheep, yes.
Yes, yeah. So Marlene's book was really helpful to me, and I started attending some of her in-person retreats that she was holding.
Can you spell her surname, please?
Yes, Winnell.
Right. Okay.
Dr. Marlene Winnell.
Something like this then.
Leaving the Fold, Dr. Marlene Winnell. That's right. And she's a psychologist located in the United States. And
she wrote her book, Leaving the Fold, 25 years ago.
Yes.
Well, when you're as old as me, that's recently.
Yeah, her book was super helpful. And then I'd had my training in counseling and in grief in particular. And I started recognizing that I was still just grieving many losses, mourning many losses related to my faith. And so I decided to develop a workshop. So I came up with the Divorcing Religion workshop. And people can find that on my website, which you've also listed for people to see, divorcingreligion.com. Thank you. And the Divorcing Religion workshop is an online 6-week workshop. It's like a small group thing. We get together every Sunday morning, of course, for a couple of hours. And the workshop is designed to reflect the stages of divorce, because losing my faith was,
And you're talking about divorce from faith here, not divorce from your partner.
Right, but I did both, and they both happened roughly about the same time. So while I was processing my divorce from my husband, we were together almost 20 years, I was also unpacking what it meant to be divorcing my religion. So that's how I put the course together.
I meant your Sunday meetup is about divorcing your religion primarily.
That's right. But you'd be amazed how many people are also divorcing their spouses as they divorce religion.
Is that common to do it, to have the same thing going on twice?
It is when you marry really young, as religion encourages you to do, and the only thing you have to have in common is religious faith. And then if you get to a point where you're rejecting your faith and you're starting to value yourself, and you're seeing, I am not happy in this union. This is not the person that I would choose.
Unless the partner is also going through the same loss of faith.
Yep, and mine did, but on a slightly different timetable. And that would never, our personalities still were just very, very different in the way that we approach things.
Another of my interviewees, an Australian-based one, was a nearly pastor. He went through the theological college, seminary school, something like that, and he got to the final exams, because they do 2 exams. They do Bachelor of Theology and Bachelor of Ministry, and he read the Bible just before his exams and decided it was nonsense.
Oh my goodness.
So he suddenly stopped becoming a pastor, and he had to have a conversation with his wife about that, because they'd met in church.
Yes. And
this could have been a very difficult conversation, but fortunately they shared a bottle of wine and decided that they both wanted out. So they're still together, happily atheistic.
Isn't that wonderful? Oh, that's a lovely story. So I developed my workshop, and then about a year after that, I thought, okay, religious trauma syndrome, which is what Dr. Winnell calls it. So that's a term that she uses. It's about the different types of symptoms that people can experience as a result of being part of a fundamentalist group. So there are losses associated with that. You're expected to give up a lot, and then when you leave that group, there are more losses. There are more symptoms, and some can be quite serious. I mean, some people have taken their own lives because they can't, because it's such a difficult transition from sacred to secular. And of course, some people are completely and utterly rejected by family, so they're bereft not only of their faith, but their community.
Yes, shunned. I loved what you just said, from sacred to secular. That's a book title.
Yes. Yes. I use that phrase often.
If it isn't a book title yet, it's going to be in the future. You've got to write it.
Yes. Well, I'm just finishing my my book right now. I'm hoping I'll be done in the next few weeks, and then I need to find a editor and publisher. But yes, thank you for that. So the journey is.
Did you have a working title for it?
At this point, I just thought I'd call it Divorcing Religion. Yes. Yeah, so I'm thinking about it.
From sacred to secular, it's got more of a punch to it.
It's a sacred to secular is such an appropriate, lets people know, the picture of what's going on. So then I decided I wanted more people to become aware of RTS, or religious trauma syndrome, because it has impacted millions and millions of people around the world. And it's gaining traction now, I think, largely because of that former president that they had there, who caused so much strife, and who has aligned himself so closely with the Republican Party and with the Christians. And so a lot of people were disgusted by that, and they're leaving the churches, as we say, emptying the pews in droves. They're just running out, but then they don't know what they're running into. They're kind of
Really?
waking up and going, what has happened?
Well,
They're
that's good
losing their
news if
faith.
it's good news if they're leaving in droves, but as you say,
Yes.
it does cause a bit of a vacuum, because the church has been such an all-enveloping, self-contained, narrow little society that
Yes.
you miss it.
And that's where I come in. So I'm not going into the church and dragging people out of the pews. I'm standing outside the church door and catching people as they fall on their way out. And they're saying, what has happened? And I'm there to say, it's not the end of the world. It's just a transition. You don't have to make it on your own. Let me help you. Let's talk about it. I can help you get connected, because there are support groups and podcasts and books and
That's a good metaphor. I can see a cartoony image of a woman standing outside a church and catching people as they fall.
Yeah.
You've painted a picture in my mind.
Good. Yeah, that's how I picture myself. And so then I decided a way to make this more visible to secular people who really don't have any idea about religious trauma syndrome is to put together a conference. So in May of this year, I hosted the first ever conference on religious trauma. Thank you, Court. Yeah, the conference on religious trauma. That was 2021. Now I'm putting it together for 2022. And so I reached out to my friend and mentor, Dr. Marlene Winnell, when I was looking at putting the first one together, because I didn't know any of these people other than Marlene. And she said, oh, well, here are some names you might want to reach out to. And she said, Dr. Daryl Ray of Recovering from Religion, and Dan Barker.
He's also been on my show, Daryl.
That's right.
He's a lovely man.
He sure is.
You can find this in my archive. I haven't heard Dan Barker yet, but I've been emailing him, and he's indicated that he's willing. So I'm looking forward to that, because he's also a great musician, isn't he?
Yes, he is. He loves music, and he's quite skilled musically. And so he and his wife are with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, I think. Is that right? Yeah. So they both spoke at the conference, and Marlene and Dr. Daryl Ray spoke. I had over 20 people speak at the conference. It was huge. It went on for 5 days. I mean, go big or go home. And of course, while I was putting it together, I was working full time. And I was involved in a different relationship and living with my partner. And then I was going to host the conference, the first one in Vancouver, and then the pandemic hit. And then my relationship also came to a screeching halt, and there were many things, just everything fell apart all at once. So it's amazing. Now I'm doing just great. I've got myself set up again, and we held the first conference in May, and now I'm looking forward to the next one, which will be in April of 2022, and it'll be online again, because we just don't know what's going on with this virus. So it's safest if we can have it online, and everybody can attend, because you're either attending or you can buy tickets after the fact and watch all the recordings.
Yes. There is a big advantage to being locked down in that respect, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to say how much I admire you for bouncing back all the time. You're indomitable.
Thank you so much. Oh, I love it that you use that word. Thank you.
Because you're like whack-a-mole, those things.
That's right. Yeah. And what I want people to know is that your power comes from you. I mean, all those times I was praying, I was actually just talking to myself. Anything that happened, anytime when I thought it was a miracle, it was me paying attention for opportunities, because I was in that frame of mind. I was aware of the crisis I was having, and everybody can do this. So you can either find your own way out, or you can do research and explore. There are other people who have gone through whatever hard time you're going through right now. So don't give up. There is a way out. Reach out for help if you need it.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, I think it's part of the religious mindset to try and deprive you of that capability. Because if they can do that, then of course you're subservient and they can control you. So
Exactly.
this is why I often get accused as an out atheist, which is not a big deal in the UK because I was never in anything to get out of. So atheist means something different here from what it means in North America. If you're an atheist in North America, it probably means that you've been religious and you've escaped.
Oftentimes.
If you're atheist in the UK, it probably means that nobody ever bothered to get you into religion at all anyway. Anyway, what they try to say is that people like me are purposeless. And that's because they want to steal my purpose. Yes. They want to be the ones who give me the purpose that they think I should have.
Yes. And this is actually a conversation that I have frequently with clients. And the idea being that when we are in a less mature state, which often we can equate with religion, we are meaning seekers. We must mature into meaning makers. And that's having left religion behind, and people can no longer tell me what is supposed to be important to me. It's up to me. I get to define my own values and what gives me purpose and meaning.
Exactly. Leave me alone. I'll decide my own purpose. Thank you very much.
Yes. That's right. And let me tell you, a lot of men, particularly if we're talking about religious ones, they have a really hard time with women who would make such a declaration.
Yes, I'm afraid there is a tendency. I've got to admit that there is a tendency in my sex to want docile women.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a journey.
And I don't know what we can do, but we've got to educate boys to expect something different.
Yeah.
To expect equality still hasn't been achieved properly.
No. And it's also, I do think things are shifting. I look at my own daughters who are now in their 20s. And just for example, sexuality, I see that it is absolutely not an issue for them. Doesn't matter if you're gay, you're bi, whatever you are. Who cares? Pass the salt. Like it's a non-issue. And that is thrilling to me that they don't have baggage around that. And so that gives me hope for other areas. And my daughters are helpful in encouraging me if I do fall into the trap of devaluing myself because I'm a woman. In any way, because sometimes I still get triggered and tripped up by things. And I've only been out about 10 years in this regard. But so my kids, they'll remind me, Mom, that's actually not true. You can say whatever you want, whenever you want. You can wear whatever you want. You can be whomever you want. And of course, I know these things, but to be reminded of them can be powerful sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine, because you were thoroughly indoctrinated for so long, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that's the other thing that they do. They try to take control of your sexuality and make it dirty so that they can force you to be pure, allegedly. And that's another way of making you subservient to their demands. Whereas I like to phrase it as, why do the religious like to stick their noses into our genitalia?
Yes. And I interact with so many men and women who are actually on some level disconnected from their own sexual selves, because the thing they really promote for boys is that masturbation is absolutely sinful and wrong, and you're dirty and terrible if you do that. And of course, we know that it's a natural part of being human. And for females, any you can't dress provocatively, you can't think provocatively, any of those things. So then there's a real disconnect. And then if they're very religious and they get married and they've saved themselves for marriage, and then their wedding night is a disaster because neither of them knows what anything about their own body or their partner's body, and it's just, it doesn't have to be that way.
No, we are animals, and we ought to recognize it. And virginity is not a prize. It's really ridiculous. Anyway, Janice, we're coming to the end of our hour, and you've been as fantastic as I thought you would be.
Oh, thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been to chat with you. I'd love to come back anytime.
Good. Well, I say a lot of my guests say that, so, and I do have some of them back if they're good. Can I just say that next week I've got a guest who's an out-and-out Christian. He's an American of Ghanaian origin who I've known online for some years now. And he is going to make a presentation of the case for being a Christian. And I am going to put my spoke in his wheel. But we'll do it respectfully, in the same way that I treat all my guests.
Yes.
So, he's a nice boy. I like him. And he calls me, what does he call me? Professor sometimes, or uncle.
That's sweet.
And we have a good relationship, and that's what we're going to keep. We're going to keep that relationship.
I like that.
So I've now got a little outro, especially for you.
Oh.
Where is it? Am I finding the right thing? Is this for your outro? Yes, here it is. Right. Okay. So thank you very much, Janice Selbie, from None to None.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thanks again, John.
It's been lovely. And thank you very much, viewers, either past or present, or future even.
Take care, everyone.
You too. Yes. Bye-bye.